Hello, and welcome to another episode of Moviemood. I'm your host, Alex Van Horn.
I'm John Alberto.
And today we are talking Herzog.
Yes, sir.
Yes, one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, and he is a new favorite of mine. I think that he has really I've dived a little bit into his filmography, and I am just absolutely fascinated would be the best word to use.
Yeah, he's a fascinating person.
Yeah.
I think we were saying before this that we kind of both agree. For me, he's not my favorite filmmaker, but he's my favorite person who's a filmmaker.
Yeah, I think I can get behind that too. I mean, just reading up on his life, watching his interviews, reading excerpts from some of his books, he is he is absolutely intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
He he lives the life that I want to live, you know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. He speaks multiple languages. Um, by all accounts, like for the films that he's made, like he should not be making movies anymore. Like he should be maybe dead. Like for some of the things he's done.
Right.
But yeah, he's managed to make some of the greatest independent films ever made. Um, he's certainly lived a long career of filmmaking, and now he seems to be transitioning, and he's been doing this for a while. He does other things as well, acting and
He ate his
uh,
shoe.
yeah, he ate his shoe for Errol Morris,
Yep.
actually,
Yep.
who's another great filmmaker. Yeah, and he's just done some incredible stuff. And I got to see him at a film festival a few years ago.
At that film
And
festival, did you get to talk to him individually, or did you okay.
no, unfortunately, but he was screening at that time Into the Inferno.
Okay.
So I got to see that in theaters, which is awesome. I also watched The Enigma of Caspar Hauser, which is a pretty good one of his fictional films. Um, and he did an interview that I saw, and he's a tall guy. He's a big guy. But he was talking about doing a lot of stuff for one of his movies. He hypnotized the cast, so like everybody acts pretty weird. That's in Heart of Glass. And also he has this thing with chickens. Like there are a lot of chickens, and especially his earlier films. And during the interview, he like showed people how to hypnotize a chicken
Oh my
uh,
goodness.
with chalk. And yeah, some things that sometimes you need to know.
Was
It's a
there
certain
anything that you really took away from that session with him?
um one of the big things that I think that I took away from it was he had some stuff about his recommendations for filmmakers, and he's not like a very like filmmaker in a way. Like he's not like a Martin Scorsese or a Quentin Tarantino who's like all about like watching, thousands of movies and then using that to do your vision. He's very much like a very literary, I think, director. And his big advice for filmmakers was you have to read. Like you have to read a lot. And
Right.
I think he even said, because in a lot of his interviews, he kind of has the same shtick that he says for a lot of things. But a few things he broke away from in the interviews there, I remember he mentioned that he thinks all filmmakers should learn Latin, which it's not going to happen. I'm not going to learn Latin. No way. And uh, he mentioned some stuff about memory, like which I never heard him talk about, but that memory is kind of like not memory is really tricky, which is true. I mean, in psychology, that's kind of what they teach you. Um, but yeah, I think I was just very inspired by by him as a person, even more so. Um, he just seems like a cool guy, and it's interesting also that um, a lot of my friends who are, have been to film school or are film people, a lot of them I don't think were really into Herzog until they saw The Mandalorian, and which is cool that he was in that and they had him in that, and it probably opened up, you know, people to seeing more of his stuff.
Sure, sure. I'd like to go back to your point about what he mentioned in regards to filmmakers needing to be avid readers.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I watch, either one of his features or one of his documentaries, one of the things that I notice is his portrayal of conflict.
Mm.
It's huge, uh, like literary conflict, like man versus nature,
Yes.
or man versus self, even in the descent into madness.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, um,
Yeah, he that's a huge theme of his. And I was thinking about it when I was watching Encounters at the End of the World, is that in a lot of ways he almost sees like his worldview is almost like a scientist's worldview, you know? It's
right,
not it's not like, everybody's inherently good or like everybody's, this or that. A lot of his characters he's almost like looking at under a microscope in a
sure,
way. Like, for example, Aguirre, Wrath of God, terrible human being, horrible, But it's sort of about his journey and how his journey is doomed in the jungle, and I think that's just kind of his worldview about a lot of uh, humanity, which can be really grim. I think
sure.
it's a
It
really
can be a
grim
little
view.
grim.
But there's also a sense of humor to a lot of it that kind of lightens it in a lot of ways. It's
Oh,
like absurd.
strong. Yeah, no doubt about that. And to your point that he's kind of like a scientist, he's also very worldly. I think about
Mm-hmm.
Encounters at the End of the World, and he's talking about how ecologists mourn the loss of endangered species, but we fail to think about the loss of language
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And so I think he really takes a broad perspective on the importance of things in nature, the importance of things in culture, and how those come together and how humanity affects that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought that was really interesting. That kind of got me into linguistics a little bit in college, and in English literature in general. Um, but that section where he talks to the guy who's a linguist who ended up coming to Antarctica uh, to study plants, I think that's a really interesting part. Um, yeah, Encounters at the End of the World is definitely worth talking about. I think it's the movie that got me into his movies.
Okay.
It was very it's very easy to watch as opposed to something like Strosek, am I saying that right?
Sure.
Strosek, or Even Dwarves Started Small, or some of his really esoteric fiction films.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's I would agree with that. It's theme, not a theme, but a place that everybody in the world is familiar with, Antarctica and Antarctic exploration and habitation. And
Yeah.
it really gives people a something grounded that they know about, and then from there he really invests into the minute details of things, which is something that's really cool about him.
Yeah, I love Encounters at the End of the World and a lot of his documentaries because, especially with Encounters at the End of the World, it's like if you look at it on the surface, it looks like it's just like a National Geographic documentary about
Exactly.
Antarctica. And you're
Yep.
like, oh, cool. Like, this is going to have penguins. Like, you think you know what you're in for. And
We do get some penguins, but
definitely. And the penguins are maybe the best part. um, but yeah, but there's like a lot of digressions that he has. Like at the very beginning, he's like talking about like he's wondering why like apes don't like settle goats and like ride them around, like just some absurd like questions. And it's like some surrealist was given the job of making a travel documentary.
Right. What are your thoughts on the way that he portrays some of the individuals in his documentary? Like, instead of allowing them to present their story, he shows it at the beginning, but then he says this story goes on and recaps it for them.
Yes, so that's an interesting thing, and I have mixed feelings about that. But you should go into the movie knowing like his methods. So for his documentaries, he's not like a cinema verite. He's not like a true, documentarian like a news reporter would be. But then you could argue like some news reporters have uh like a skewed point of view, like they have
Sure.
their own op-ed sort of personality, whether they're
Sure.
looking left or right. But Herzog definitely has his point of view, and it's not, really political. Sometimes it is.
I think it
But
kind of adds to the absurdist aspect
oh yeah.
of
Well,
everything
he
he does.
well he actually makes up stuff in his documentaries, which is I remember when I was at the festival, there was another documentarian there who I think he died a few years ago. Blanking on his name. He did um this documentary about the Clinton election in 1992. Anyway, he was there, and he's like a real, like, he just follows people around and he doesn't add anything. You could argue in the edits that he maybe adds something, but not really. And Herzog was like, I would like to make a war with this person because he's, you know, Herzog is about poetry, whereas, he's not actually a documentarian in the true sense. But it's interesting the way, in answering your question, it's interesting the way he portrays the people, and you wonder if certain points are scripted or not.
Mm.
At least when you watch it on the second time and know what he's doing. But I like it because I think each person has their own personality that they bring to it, and they are like characters. Um, and yeah, it's just cool. Like, those people are fascinating people and have their own crazy life stories similar to Werners.
This may be kind of a broad slanted question, but do you do you think he likes people? Like, do you think he likes mankind?
Oh wow. Yeah, I think he does. I remember I was talking to my cousin. He was like, "Wow, he seems like really nihilistic." And I was like, I don't think he's nihilistic,
He has glimmers of
because
hope in there every once in a while.
definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think it's similar, I guess, if you watch his from Burden of Dreams, his monologue about the jungle and how it's, like profound murder or whatever.
Right.
I think he likes people, but he also likes people who don't fit in. I think that's really the people that he connects with, are the freaks and sort of the weirdos. Yeah, I think you can relate to them, and I think that's a powerful thing. I think he's very yeah, I think he's very like pro humanity, but he's perfectly fine with looking at some different people, or some very, yeah, dangerous people.
Yeah,
That was
it
getting
was
people sick.
interesting in one of his documentaries, Grizzly Man. He actually every once in a blue moon he seems like he individually cares about the people in his documentary. Like, he receives a tape that shows
Timothy
or
Treadwell.
yeah, Timothy Treadwell, and audio of his death. And when he's interviewing, Timothy Treadwell's life partner, if you will,
Hmm.
he's like, you must never listen to this, you have to burn this.
Yeah.
And it is really, really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think he has a certain, um I don't know, there's a certain, like, he won't go too far. Like, in certain things he will go, the distance, but I don't think he would be comfortable with like showing something like that, like, just because it's like, would be really atrocious
No,
to
I
watch,
agree,
you
but it's
know.
interesting that he presented that in the documentary. I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, like that
Yeah,
interaction between them in the documentary.
that's true. Well, he definitely makes himself a character in
Yeah,
his documentaries,
yeah.
and you wonder how much, how much that character is the character he's making. Like he wants to make himself this legend, or if you know, it's a way for us to um, come to terms with whatever subject he's dealing
Hmm.
with.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think I raised the point of his relationships with individuals in his documentaries because it takes me back to thinking about the relationships that he has with the actors in his feature
Hmm.
films. You
Yeah.
know, very early in his filmography and his
Aguirre.
fascinating relationship with Klaus Kinski. You know,
Hmm.
so
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of legends about that, um, especially about Aguirre and Fitzcarraldo, where him and Klaus would be stuck in the jungle, and I think they were childhood friends for the most part. They knew each other when they're kids, but Klaus was older, of course, um, and I guess they were, there are certain points where Klaus would get into a rage, and Werner apparently pointed a gun at him, and then apparently Klaus pointed a gun at him. So who knows if that actually happened? But that's sort of the legend that comes around. But if you watch like the making of footage of Fitzcarraldo, like Klaus is a crazy man. He's a wild man,
absolutely.
and I think I don't know if if I think it's cool like to point a gun at somebody for any reason, let alone for a film.
I will go
Um,
out there and say it's not cool.
yes,
Um,
it's not cool.
go
I
out on a
agree. I
limb here,
agree.
but
I was reading, but I remember. I mean, I think it's just a part of the legend of Werner Herzog, like if that happened or not, because I don't know how much evidence there is, but
right.
I was reading this book of interviews with David Lynch, and David Lynch was talking about how much he admired Werner Herzog because they're very similar filmmakers in a way. And the interviewer was like, "Isn't he crazy? Didn't he like point a gun at somebody in the jungle?" And David Lynch was like, "That's not crazy. Get real." Just totally something David Lynch would say.
Oh, that's wild. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think about he made a lot of his early movies with Klaus Kinski, and Klaus Kinski has since passed away. But
Hmm.
I think about the movies that he's made, not super recently, but in the 2000s,
Yeah.
and some of the actors that he has worked with since then. One of your favorites, Nicolas Cage,
Yes.
and two of my favorites, Michael Shannon and Willem Dafoe, and My Son, What Have Ye Done?
Oh yeah, I love those actors too.
And I like to think, and I think about, are they good representations of an actor like Klaus Kinski's legacy?
Yeah, well, that's hard to say, because I'll bet you that those actors in the 2000s were probably easier to work with than
Oh,
Klaus Kinski,
I am sure.
because Klaus Kinski was notoriously insane. Like I think on Dr. Zhivago, like he was hard to work with, and he's really amazing in that movie. But I mean, just thinking about him on the set of a David Lean movie would be crazy. Apparently, he turned down Indiana Jones, the first one, because he thought the script was bad.
Interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm kind of glad he wasn't in Indiana Jones. It's fine that he wasn't in that. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of yeah, he was definitely not a safe individual, I think. But what I was hearing about with regard to Bad Lieutenant is that for Werner Herzog, the way he works with actors is actually very like uh it's a little bit almost cold, I think, but it also is um I guess a fine way to do it. He doesn't really talk to the actors about like their performance or like how they should be. He just kind of is an observer.
Mhm.
of their behavior and what they do, which is probably something he got from Klaus, like just how he could continue to make movies with Klaus Kinski, um, which is just to keep your distance and make sure they're okay and happy as they go into their, you know, crazy realm. Um, so I think that's just his method from doing
R-
that, and it's kind of carried over.
Right. And I think that may be one of the reasons that his filmography is a little bit hard to get into, and why, and maybe for me, why he's a fascinating individual, but not necessarily my favorite filmmaker,
Mm-hmm.
because you look at a director like, Stanley Kubrick or something, and I think we talked about this on another episode, but he's essentially, out there micromanaging his actors,
Oh
taking,
yeah.
take after take after take until he has what he perceives as perfection,
Mm-hmm.
versus, to your point, Herzog being out there and just observing it. So we were talking about, Kubrick and the way he like micromanaged take after take after take, drove Shelley Duvall crazy.
Yeah, among
And
many other actors.
yeah, bless her heart.
Yeah.
And until he got what he perceived as perfection,
Mm.
versus you know, the observer perspective that
Yeah.
Herzog does in his films.
Yeah, and I don't think he does too many takes. He's not like David Fincher or Stanley Kubrick or Paul Thomas Anderson. And he doesn't really seem to be that much of a perfectionist, except for how he how he goes about his craft, which is, it seems to be, he doesn't, he doesn't do special effects.
Mm-hmm.
He prefers to do things realistically to a
On
certain extent.
location. Yep.
And he also has a very like literary sensibility where um there's a lot of surrealism in his films.
Yeah, but he does
um
raise the point that Timothy Treadwell uses multiple takes when he's filming, and he
oh, that's
admires that about
true.
Treadwell. Yeah.
Oh, well, maybe he does then. Maybe
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
about
but he one thing I do like is that, he's filming on location,
that.
and
Mm-hmm.
like like one of the ones that I watched recently was Aguirre, The Wrath of God,
Yeah,
and it is clear that these actors and this very small crew, I'm sure, are
doing it.
in the jungle. They
They're
are.
doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Aguirre is awesome. It's not a movie you can like pop in when you're at a party.
No,
Which I think I did one time, and yeah, no one was into it.
I
Also,
was at that party, and then
yeah, yeah.
yeah, and then
I
I
was like,
came back
what
and
the,
revisited it about
what is
12 years
this?
later. So
Yeah, it's not like, you can't pop in like 2001 A Space Odyssey or
sure.
something like that, when you're just chilling. You should probably turn on Anchorman or something.
Yep.
But
Every
yeah,
movie has its place.
it's true. It's
Yep.
true. And it's amazing what he accomplished in Aguirre, Wrath of God. Because you definitely feel like you're there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that it's very not realistic but real.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the environment in his movies, it's almost like a character itself.
Yeah, definitely.
It's incredibly clear that he loves nature. I mean, just
Mhm.
thinking about the locations of some of his movies, deep caves, the jungle, Antarctica, Alaska.
Mhm.
So,
Volcanoes.
yep.
Yeah, he has a lot of one of his pretty consistent shots that he goes to, or you could kind of tell it's a Herzog movie, I guess, is, if he has close-ups of animals, or if he has these, big landscape shots of mountains and clouds going over. He's definitely a mountain man.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think one of the big things that makes him interesting for me is that he definitely seems like an outsider, not only to film, but to like civilization itself. Like he's definitely he looks for at um, at civilization and people with with a big distance.
Right. And he's like and to that point, he's like an outsider to outsiders too. Like he's
Yeah.
not, when he's making his documentaries, he's not, he is not coming from the perspective, to your point, of like, National Geographic.
Or
He,
even uh, the movie Into the Wild.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He is, observing all of these incredibly unique individuals. And to your point about him kind of becoming a character in his documentaries, is also a unique character that's outside of them, but also outside of the rest of the world.
Yeah. In his most recent documentary, he did this that just came out. You can see it online. It's called Nomad. It's about a writer that he was really good friends with that was kind of like a similar person to him, Bruce Chatwin, who I think died of AIDS in the 80s. And he was similar, like, was this guy who walked on foot everywhere. Also, something we haven't mentioned, he used to walk long distances on foot. Um, and I think the writer from that movie said that like he's kind of a person of many contradictions. Like he's this very cold person, but he's also very much loves like animals and he loves like people. So there's a lot of different aspects to him. He's
Sure.
also in The Simpsons. Um, he's in Rick and Morty.
Uh, that's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think he's on Parks and Rec. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So he's, yeah, he does a lot.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to pause this again, but I just got the Associated Press news alert that Joe Biden has in fact met the number. So
Fuck yeah.
so we are.
Fuck yes.
It's gonna be okay.
Woo!
Be okay.
Yes.
Take a screenshot of it real quick.
Oh, it's still gonna be a fucking ridiculous 2 months.
I know it's gonna be madness,
It's still gonna
but
be a roller coaster.
maybe
Like
Herzog will make a documentary about it.
that would be great. I think he's just chilling in LA right now.
Does he? Does and we can. You're the edit expert, but you can fill this in or not. But does he
Yeah.
live in LA or does he live in Germany? Like,
I think he lives
or
in,
he
I think
probably
he has
has
houses in
multiple.
both. Yeah, but I think he probably lives in LA. From what I understand. And yeah, there's a lot of other interesting legends about him in LA. Like there's some interview where he got shot with a pellet rifle for some reason, and he like continued the interview. And then he like saved Joaquin Phoenix's life apparently.
Can you tell me about this legend? I have no idea about this.
So during the filming of that weird Joaquin Phoenix documentary,
Yep.
Joaquin Phoenix got in a crash um somewhere in LA, Mulholland Drive or something. I don't know. And apparently it was overturned and gas was leaking, and apparently Herzog was there. And apparently Joaquin Phoenix was going to light a cigarette, and Werner Herzog told him not to and got him out of the car. And apparently Joaquin Phoenix was going to say thank you, and he left. Like Werner Herzog left. He was like, I'm not gonna have that. Like he's like a superhero.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
that's the second best thing I've heard today. So,
Yeah. Yeah, he
yeah,
saved Joaquin Phoenix's life.
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Um yeah, that's also the other thing is like I think he's a very smart person, like obviously, because if he was, a dumb person, he would be dead a long time ago because of, you know, all these crazy movies he's made. You know, I there's also something about from that Nomad movie where that writer was apparently visiting the set of one of his movies, and apparently he was like, it's a set of like everyone is having a nervous breakdown except for Werner Herzog, who's just like calm.
Level-headed.
Yeah, level headed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he is incredibly level-headed.
Mm-hmm.
You don't. you don't. One of the things I think everybody who likes Herzog loves about him is his voice,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of monotonous, but I think that's one of the things that's awesome about him. He
Yeah.
because
He
he
go
sorry,
ahead.
yeah, he says these sometimes these absolutely wild things, but he says it in just that level,
Straight.
great
I mean,
tone.
that's why
Yeah,
it's funny too.
yeah, exactly,
That's why he has
exactly.
funny stuff because he's like just says it. There's there's one part I remember thinking was so absurd, and like later I thought about it, and like I didn't think it was funny at the time, but when I thought about it later, I was like, that's really funny. Like there's his internet documentary where he was interviewing these young people our age who were like internet and video game addicts that like had to go like into the woods and like go through rehab and do all this stuff. And he was interviewing them and he was like asking them about the internet, and they're like, I really don't want to because I think I could like lapse, like I could go back into, just being in the video
Oh
game.
wow, yeah.
And and there's like an aside where he's like, I wanted to ask them about the demented dwarfs. I wanted to ask them, and he just goes into like all this medieval, like absurd things like that he thinks are in video games. It's like cool.
I love that.
Yeah, he's a funny dude
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the things about people in general is we get a perception as of someone as a filmmaker, but we one of the things I like about Herzog is we get to see those sides of him. Like his documentaries are broad scope these broad scope things, but the way he chooses to present it, you get to see the funny side. Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's about in everything that's going on in the world you can always find a little bit of light, and that's
Yeah.
why, to your cousin's point, he
Mm-hmm.
may seem nihilistic at first, but he's and to your point, he actually really quite loves humanity. So
For sure. Yeah, and I think he loves humanity, and he seems to love um yeah, just like science and knowledge, and I think he's really inspired me to be someone who's like a lifelong learner or whatever.
mhm,
It's like cuz he knows a lot about different things, and that's just interesting um that he you know has this desire to learn so much. And it's kind of like that's kind of like what it is to be like a traveler, or to go to different countries or go to different places.
absolutely. And I think one of the things that we both have in common is we love to walk, and
Yeah.
I think that
That's yeah.
I don't know if that's something that we acquired from Herzog and his
Yeah.
perspective on the world, but
Yeah,
but
maybe. I mean, it might have influenced me, and then I kind of like just transferred it to you at some point.
yeah,
I don't know, but
but
when we were in Spain, we walked a whole lot.
we sure did.
Oh
And
man,
I think you mentioned to me one time in kind of either that, like an online class that you saw from Herzog, or that session that you
yeah,
had with him, that he said one of the most important things that someone can do is walk. And
yeah. I mean, for his master class is also something interesting to talk about, because like he kind of chooses some odd film choices. Like he's not like Steven Spielberg, who would probably say like watch Lawrence of Arabia. He like shows like Viva Zapata, which is like an okay movie. It is actually really good. I think it's written by Steinbeck,
hmm,
um, with Marlon Brando, but mainly his focus is on like filmmakers should read and walk. And one of the homework assignments he has is that people should walk like 2,000 miles, which is not gonna happen for me in one sitting,
what is his
one
time
walking.
frame? What is the time frame for that? Like for walking 2,000 miles. Is that walk
Yeah, I don't
2,000
know.
miles in a year, in a
Oh,
week,
actually, I
or
might be
nonstop?
that might be more than he gave. It might have been 200 miles.
Okay.
But I know that he walked several times. I think he like did the parameter of West Germany, and then I think he walked from like Munich to Paris at one point for his book, Walking on Ice. And yeah, I don't know how long it would take, but he does it, has
Good
done
for
it.
him.
Yeah. But you definitely couldn't see somebody like Quentin Tarantino or uh Wes Anderson walking that like 200 miles. Like
Right.
it's not, I don't think it's essential for a filmmaker.
I think it's something that's unique to his perspective, and that's
For sure.
yeah, and that's
Yeah.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's what makes him a unique filmmaker.
Yeah.
So
Maybe
which movies did you watch?
so. I've seen a few more of his movies, but in the last week, to keep my mind off other things, I've watched Encounters, Grizzly Man,
Yeah.
Aguirre, The Wrath of God, and I've watched about half of his Nosferatu movie.
Nice. Yeah, I like that might be my favorite of his fiction films. His Nosferatu. It's really just moody and evocative, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And yeah. And it doesn't have his like huge, his huge scope of, like taking a steamboat up a mountain or, taking a small crew dressed as conquistadors into the jungle.
Right. What I've noticed is most of his movies aren't incredibly long. Um,
No.
they tend to be under 2 hours. Fitzcarraldo is kind of the exception to that.
Yeah.
It's pretty sprawling.
Yeah, Fitzcarraldo might be his longest movie. I think it took him like 12 years to make
Wow,
or something
I
like that.
had no idea.
Yeah. And I think like originally it had Mick Jagger as the main character. Mick left. Um, so yeah.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
there's some footage of him in it. But yeah, his movies are pretty short. His movies are also not like referential of other movies really, except for I think Nosferatu. That's the only one because it makes reference to the silent film. But I think most of his movies are not like that. They're not like movies.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely a valid point.
Mm. And
Um,
also, I was um I was thinking about this earlier. Is that I think if you're like a filmmaker like myself, um, you kind of look at different directors to emulate, um, instead of emulating yourself. And I feel like with a few directors it's kind of like impossible to truly emulate them. Like mainly I'm thinking Werner Herzog and Jean-Luc Godard are
mhm.
two of the ones that you're like, if you try to make movies like that, it just won't work.
Right.
Yeah, because they're so unique. And I think also a lot of people in Hollywood have tried that with Christopher Nolan as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of directors certainly have their style. Christopher Nolan has his style. Wes
Mhm.
Anderson absolutely has his
For sure.
style. Um, and and if you wanted to emulate one of their movies, you definitely could.
Hmm.
Symmetrical shots
Hmm.
or things of that nature. But with
Or time messing with the time
yep,
in Christopher Nolan movie.
yep. But with like Herzog, because of the perspective that he takes in his filming, and he doesn't seem to have, in his features anyway, a particular obsession with any style of cinematography
Yeah.
or anything like that. It's hard to emulate. They are very Herzogian, if you will.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Yeah, I don't think he saw a movie till he's 17 because he
Oh
lived
wow.
in like the mountains, and I don't think he made a phone call till he was like 19. I mean, he's definitely somebody who grew up in post-war Germany pretty poor, I think. So, he came from a background of like going through the mountain, just going mountain hiking and reading, the Bible and reading like Greek literature. And yeah, it's more of a unique worldview than like a directing style.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, Versus I don't know if you've seen the other German filmmakers from that come from his generation, but they're all different from each other
Right.
in a way.
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
what do you think has made Herzog, besides his smarts and everything like that,
his voice.
last as long as he has as a filmmaker, just being alive on this earth,
Yeah,
everything like that.
man, I think it just has to do with endurance for that guy. And I have to say, I think he's kind of come into his own in a way. And I think it kind of has to do with the internet, because he's such an interesting personality that um, I think he has kind of a presence on the internet, even though he doesn't have like a Twitter account or anything. Like there are all these people that imitate him, and he kind of has this celebrity just lately. But I don't think that's the reason he's been able to make so many movies. Um, yeah, I just think he has some endurance,
Okay.
and either mentally or physically.
Walking and reading.
Yeah, walking and reading. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, those are, reading is like a mental workout, and walking is like a physical workout. So that's
Yep.
how he's done it, man. And I think where other directors, like if you think about Francis Ford Coppola, like Apocalypse Now was like his Herzog movie, and he made it, and then he didn't really make anything like The Godfather or The Godfather Part Two, like after that. Like he
Yeah,
made
kind of wiped him out then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it really took a lot out of him, like mentally and physically. But Herzog has made like five like Apocalypse Now style movies. Or
Right.
not even five, like a lot.
Right.
Yeah. And it just has to do with some kind of endurance. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you could watch one non-Herzog movie, but see it from Herzog's perspective, what would it be for you? What movie would that be?
hmm. Probably the only one I can think of now is probably Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Good choice. Tell
Yeah.
me about that.
Have you seen it?
I have.
Yeah. So, there are not a lot of movies that Herzog recommends. Like I think the only ones he has are like the Apu trilogy, which is great. Um, Treasure of Sierra Madre, and I think that's it. And that's the only one. Those are the only ones he recommends. Like if you look at like Spike Lee or Martin Scorsese, they're gonna give you a huge list of stuff to
Yep.
watch. But yeah, I think it just has to do with here's like specific thing, which is like man going out into nature, man against nature, man versus man. But I would be interested to hear what his thoughts are on Treasure of Sierra Madre, because I mean it seems like he could have directed his own version of it at some
Right.
point. Yeah.
Do you think he would have been able to work with Humphrey Bogart?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
If he can handle Klaus Kinski, I'm sure he can handle any actor.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
But yeah, he when he was at the film festival, he screened. They were like, "What's the one thing that inspires you as a filmmaker. And he showed like some Fred Astaire clip of him like tap dancing. I was like, okay.
Nice.
Yeah, and there's certainly a lot of interesting use of music, I think. I think his music is some of the reasons I keep coming back to his stuff.
Mhm. I noticed it especially in his documentaries, actually, which isn't necessarily always a point in documentaries
Mm.
to have like a great score, but just the simple music of Grizzly Man, or the very end music in Encounters at the End of the World.
Yeah.
Yeah,
With
like
the
Gregorian chanting.
Gregorian chanting and the sounds of the seals.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. Like he's definitely um classical, very European, loves Wagner, loves opera, and I think Wagner especially like really fits well with movies in general. Like you
Mhm.
can play a lot of like Wagner-ish type stuff and
Sure.
over a movie, and it it works. And I think there's some article I read about Wagner and Hollywood, and a lot of it had to do with like Star Wars and all this other stuff. But I think opera has a lot to do with film. I don't know anything about opera, but at all, except for whatever Wagner. I know who Wagner is, and Mozart. Um, but it was just talking about the relationship with that, and I think Werner is directed opera, so that kind of tells you a little bit about where he's coming from. And um yeah, so I like his use of music. I like that he has this crazy opera while he's showing like videos of jellyfish and
Yep.
undersea stuff. Those are some really cool scenes, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, definitely a fascinating man. Definitely a fascinating filmmaker. Why why do you think he dedicated Encounters at the End of the World to Roger Ebert?
Ebert was a huge, that was something I was thinking about too. Like I think really like, and I think about movies now, it's really a rough time for movies, but it's also kind of a good time because I think it's a moment of change.
Are you,
And
yeah, to clarify, do you mean like amidst the pandemic as a whole, or do you like?
I think even before the pandemic for sure, because it's killed, so many theaters. But even before then, with the internet, it's been a big shift. And just the fact that there's Rotten Tomatoes, I'm not a big fan of Rotten Tomatoes personally, and I think we lost something when Roger Ebert died.
Mhm.
And Roger Ebert was a huge proponent of Werner Herzog and his movies. Was a huge fan. And I think they were good friends. And I think that's why I got into Herzog in the first place, is because I read a review of Encounters at the End of the World, and naturally it's 4 stars from Roger Ebert because it
Of
has his
course.
name on it,
Yep. Yep.
um, but it's also a great documentary, I think. Um, and yeah, I mean, even when Roger Ebert was wrong, it was interesting to read why he thought it was wrong, and then you could kind of like make up your own mind. Whereas with Rotten Tomatoes, you kind of get this conglomerate of multiple perspectives, which is not like, I don't think Wonder Woman is as good as a Robert Bresson movie, but
Sure.
it has a huge, Rotten Tomatoes rating. But
Yeah, and
I don't think it's as important personally uh as something like a Chantal Ackerman or Agnes Varda movie, but it still has that, it's, you know what I mean? It's kind of like it's kind of a group
yeah,
mentality.
exactly. And I think what people have to remember is that it's an aggregator versus a actual site to get insight on the movie itself.
Right. Despite a individual perspective uh take on it. Yeah. And
Right.
so it definitely gets skewed And you have to think that a lot of movies, the perception of them changes like 20 or 30 years later. So
Yeah,
like movies that are, hits like that are hits later, like Night of the Hunter, are, were not really well received in the 50s because they're too, you know, radical for that
sure.
era. So you have to take also that into perspective, that it kind of takes time to figure out what are the staying power movies.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's absolutely a terrific point.
Yeah,
Um, so let's
thank
go
you.
ahead and wrap up with. I think we've touched on the point that Herzog the man is great. Herzog the filmmaker is certainly unique.
Yes.
If you had to an average moviegoer, to recommend something to them, a feature and a documentary,
Yeah.
to see if Herzog is up their alley, which ones
Mm.
would you recommend?
Well, definitely Encounters at the End of the World or Into the Inferno, as far as the documentaries go. Little Dieter Needs a Fly, also super good. As far as the fiction go, the feature film uh options, I mean, I would say, if you want to go right into it, it's probably Aguirre, Wrath of
Okay.
God. It's probably his, I mean, it's probably his best feature film, to be honest, but there are also some great ones that are worth watching. Strosek, super good, but really rough, really hard to watch. And even Dwarves Started Small, crazy, kooky, you know. I wouldn't recommend those as like starters though. But Aguirre for sure, Nosferatu for sure, and if you have the time, Fitzcarraldo.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, good insights.
Yeah. Yeah. Werner Herzog, he's a legend. Go check him out.
Yep, absolutely. So 10 out of 10, I recommend Herzog.
Mm-hmm.
I believe you do too.
Oh yeah.
Yep. And appreciate you listening.
Yeah. And leave a comment as to somebody you might be interested in us talking about. Um, and we can certainly try that out. We can do
Perfect.
that. Yeah. Cool. See you next time on another episode of Movie Mood.